I'm going to spray it down. And then once this is all sprayed down, what's going on, Daytona fans? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be working on Ragnarok, the Ford Ranger. The right caliper has frozen, so what's happening is it's constantly squeezing the brake pads. It's killing the miles per gallon, and it's also killing the brake pads and rotors, and it's just not safe. So we're going to go ahead and replace it. The great thing about caliper replacement is that you only have to do one at a time. Unlike pads and rotors and tires where you have to do it in sets and pairs, calipers are always only replaced as needed. So let's take a quick look at the caliper here. As you can see, there's not really anything wrong with it, but it is seizing up, so we're going to go ahead and replace it. And one good way to know whether your caliper is seizing up or not is that there's a burning smell after driving a little bit, because the caliper is constantly stepping on the brakes and is burning up your pads and your rotors. So we can tell that since this is a 2006, it's relatively rusty, so we're going to hit it with some PB Blaster and come back in about 20 minutes after it's gotten into the bolts. That way we can start disassembly. Alright, so while the PB Blaster is working, we're going to take a look at the new caliper. Now the new caliper, much like brakes, have a film on them, and it's very sticky, and the point of this is to protect it from rust and corrosion. So, can you come closer? So this is the new caliper. It is called a semi-loaded caliper, which means that it's got everything except the brake pads. It's got the bracket, the pistons itself, the caliper itself, new bolts, here, the bleeder valve, and it was supposed to come with a couple of copper washers, but it didn't. That's all right, we bought some, but you know what, it is what it is. That's why you always inspect the parts before you start tearing things apart, because you never know if you need to stop by your auto parts store for some washers or some fluids or whatever. So all I'm gonna do is clean this film up with some brake cleaner. Brake cleaner is something that really breaks down grease and oil, and it works really well, not just with brakes, but with anything that's dirty on the car, as long as it's not on the paint, because it'll eat the paint. So I'm just going to show you real quick. I'm going to spray it down, and then once this is all sprayed down, we're just going to wipe it with a shop towel, and they'll be ready to be installed. Alright, now that the PB Blaster has done its job, I was able to get these two caliper bolts loose, and before I take the entire caliper off, I want to make sure this banjo bolt comes out as well, because it's pretty useless for us to do all this work if this banjo bolt is frozen. Now luckily it's not. I was able to get this to turn, and the way you know that it's not stripping is that when you turn it, brake fluid should come out, and it did. So I just tightened it back up, because right now we don't need to have all the brake fluid flowing out. We just need to get the caliper off, and then I'm going to put it on the control arm here and then get the bracket out, and really after that it's just a matter of putting the new caliper on and reassembling, and we'll be done. This is a very fast job, Daytona fans. Alright, Daytona fans, everything's out. Here's the old bracket, brake pads, rotor. We're going to let that hang, and the caliper. Now the caliper, you have to find a place to either put it or hang it. There are things inside this rubber line that could bend and break if you just let the caliper hang on the line. You don't want to be replacing the line as well, because all you're trying to do is get this done, and this is a very fast job. Don't turn it into a much longer job than it needs to be. So now we're gonna put the new bracket on, and it's just a reverse process. So it's gonna go in like this, and then we're gonna load up the new caliper and pump the brakes, and we'll be done. Hey, you know, while I'm filming, can you just explain just talk into the camera, you don't have to film yourself, but just tell everyone what it felt like and when you started like noticing something was wrong.
Okay, sure.
And you know, the miles per gallon, all that stuff, just as I'm doing this.
Just right now? Okay. So Beth here. Hi Daytona fans and Ranger fans. Okay, so I wanted to tell you guys why this is happening in the first place. So I noticed the truck especially when I was driving on the highway, started to have this kind of shudder feeling, a bit of shaking. And it usually happened after I was driving for, I don't know, about 15 minutes, and especially at higher speeds. And like I would get off the highway, head to work, and every time I would like come to a stop, I felt this kind of like a gritty grinding kind of feeling, and the brakes would start to squeak. And so this happens sometimes, but not all the time. So I had talked to Kevin about it, and he had determined that I should drive more safely on the back roads on the way to work. So I didn't take the highway anymore, and I did notice that it didn't happen as often. Another symptom was the smell. It was like, I thought it was like a rubbery, kind of gross chemical smell that would be coming from the front. And I don't know much about cars or trucks, so I just knew it didn't smell great, and it was coming from the front area. And then, like, we determined that it was coming from the front right side.
All right, Daytona fans, now we're gonna put the caliper on, and all we're gonna do is take off this banjo bolt and really quickly swap it out with this one. Put the banjo bolt in. We have our 2 copper washers. It's gonna go, one's gonna go right here, and the other one is gonna go on top of the banjo bolt. And these copper washers are designed so that when you tighten it up, it gets crushed. And then once it's crushed, it creates a seal which prevents the brake fluid from coming out. You have to replace the banjo bolt washers every time you do calipers, because each caliper is different, just like tires and brakes, and you don't want to reuse it because you're going to end up with a leak and you'll be doing this job a second time. So
I have a question.
Sure.
Is that washer pure copper?
It should be, yeah. Should be copper. It's very, very soft.
Soft, yeah.
So once it gets crushed, it can't be crushed again. It won't form back into its original shape.
Yeah, it's starting to rain.
All right. Now that's loose, we gotta work fast. All right. There's the old bolt. Old caliper just comes right out. You see that copper washer there, and there's another one here. We're replacing these 2 right now. Temporarily tightening that, and I'm gonna put the caliper back on. That way it can have a little bit more torque to tighten it all the way. Now the caliper just uses these 2 bolts that go in the back here. All right. Now that we've officially tightened it, we clean it up with some brake cleaner. Make sure the fluid still isn't coming out. If it's coming out, that means you haven't done it. That means you haven't tightened it enough. All right, so I'm going to put this clear tube over the bleeder, because once the fluid starts coming out, it's going to start dripping down the caliper. And in order to save us some more cleaning, all we have to do is put a 3/8 tubing over the bleeder, loosen it up, and wait until the fluid comes out. You want to keep note of the max line, right? Once we start bleeding, this fluid here is going to start going down, because it's going to start going into the caliper. We want to make sure this doesn't drain, because once it does, air pockets start to go in, and we're going to have to bleed all 4 calipers, and that is just a headache not worth having. All right, now that the brakes have been bled, there are no more air pockets in the caliper. And you do not want air pockets, because air compresses and fluid doesn't. When air compresses, that's when your brakes feel spongy. And spongy brakes means ineffective brakes, which means it'll take you longer distances to stop, and that could end up in a very bad situation for yourself. Now he's going to wipe down the rotor just a little bit, do one last cleanup with the brake cleaner, and then we are all set. Now, the bleeder has this little black rubber piece, and you want to put it back on the bleeder when you're done, because if you don't, it's going to rust, and then the next time you need to use the bleeder, it'll probably not work. Now, if you come with me over here and take a look at the master cylinder, notice how the brake fluid is now at halfway point. Because we filled the caliper, the fluid has gone from max down over here. Now we're going to refill it. We're not going to refill it all the way because that would imply that there are brand new pads and brand new rotors. So what we're going to do is probably just fill it to between the halfway point. Alright, so now that I've refilled the fluid, it's in between this lip and the max line. And again, we don't want to put it all the way up because that would imply that we have brand new pads, and we don't. Because next time we put brand new pads in, it will overflow. So if we have this little gap, and next time we do pads and there's just a little bit more missing, we can always add more. Alright, Daytona fans, so that's how you replace a caliper. I would rate this job probably a 2 out of 10. It's very easy as long as the bolts are willing to work with you, and in our case they were. We put PB Blaster on it and it came right out. And you definitely need 2 people to bleed the brakes. You could try to do it one person. There are things out there that'll help you, but I prefer having 2 people. That way I can see the fluid, and that way the person in there doesn't have to worry about it. Alright, Daytona fans, that's it for this video. If you haven't already, please comment, subscribe, and like. It helps the engagement. It helps YouTube bring my videos to new viewers the more we engage. And of course, until next time, have a great day. Peace.